Welcome to the Strategic Management Accounting course, where we teach the value-adding steps and processes necessary to execute strategy. Whether you are just starting up or looking to grow your business, then this course is for you. With your host, Dr. Neil O'Connor.
Hi, we're back again. Yes, and you know, this was week 6. I've changed it back to week 5. Week 5 Learning Objective Summary. Okay, Learning Objective 1 is all about recognize which 2 generic strategies a company is using. So it's cost leadership, product differentiation. I'll take you through those 2 different strategies. Re-engineering, Learning Objective 2. Understand basically what is re-engineering about. Remember in week 2 I introduced that concept to you because you knew that there were 4 types of value changing activities in the organization. Re-engineering was one of them, and we bypassed that because we focused on measurement, activity analysis, cause effect analysis. We focused on the other 3 short-term approaches to getting change in the organization under process value analysis. But remember, there was re-engineering, and what was interesting about the re-engineering was I said, that's a long-term thing. That is a radical change, and let's save that for now. Well, interesting, chapter 12 introduces you in half a page or 1 page about what re-engineering is about. Essentially is basically a total reorganization. So for example, one factory I went to in China, and I was talking to them about what have they done to try and improve their cost management. And they said, we used to have production lines spread over 2 floors, and so the products would go through one production line. This was LED material that they were making, and it would go to the end. They'll put them in a box on a trolley, put them into the lift and take it down to the next floor, and that would start on the next assembly line where other parts were actually assembled into that partially assembled product. And so what they did was they got new land from the government and actually built a whole new factory where they were able to put the production line end to end on one floor, you see. So that's what that is re-engineering. You're actually starting from afresh. You're actually changing the way the whole process is set up. That's a great example of re-engineering. That's a big investment and it's more long term. The balanced scorecard, Learning Objective 3. You need to understand the 4 perspectives of the balanced scorecard. And then we're going to look at evaluating strategy, analyze changes in operating income to evaluate strategy. Finally, there is engineered and discretionary costs. I want you to understand the difference between the 2. And then managing unused capacity, being able to identify unused capacity and how to manage it. Now, we're not going to have time to cover this Learning Objective 6, and that's something that we'll have to leave for another time. So let's move into the good stuff, shall we? Here we want to start with strategy. How do firms succeed? Well, really, they succeed by focusing on one type of customer or another. There are two basic types of customers out there. There are customers that are looking for low cost, and then there are customers that are searching for products that serve a particular need, and they are kind of more like a differentiated type product. And so getting back to how firms succeed, we want to think about what do we mean by success? We could name some successful firms. Like every firm has to have a plan that will lead to success. Well, we hope so. And we probably need to measure. How do we measure progress towards success? So let's think about this Learning Objective 1. All right, so we have lots of firms here, and we can name some of them like, over here we have PQI, we've got HTC. We know PQI is a big Taiwanese manufacturer of memory devices, USB devices. We have a lot of the Hang Seng Index constituents here: China Mobile, Chung Kong, HSBC, Johnson Electric. Now we've got some more recent ones. You see some of these are old granddaddies. More recent ones like Alibaba, we've got Huawei, and there's a lot of interesting ways in which Tencent, Baidu, WeChat. We've got lots of Chinese firms that in some ways are successful, like Alibaba has been successful, $200 billion plus company now listed on the New York Nasdaq Stock Exchange. We've got Huawei, very successful, a major infrastructure supplier around the world, but not listed on a foreign stock exchange. And then we have Tencent, a locally listed company in Hong Kong, very successful in China. And Baidu, listed on Nasdaq, very successful in China. And then there's other firms like Xiaomi, we know is not listed, but we know is successful because they are the third largest smartphone manufacturer in China, in Asia, and close to in the world, after Apple, after Samsung, making a 3% margin on their product. They have a $43 billion market cap, really funded by venture capitalists at the moment. So we know there are successful firms out there. Okay, so we could also talk about how we can implement strategy, but this is something that we want to save for another course. But this is something I would actually take organizations through to implement strategy. So we just want to bypass this slide for the moment and maybe come back to that and in another video. All right, but basically we can think about those organizations as being product differentiators or cost leaders. So for example, Apple is a product differentiator. What about Xiaomi? Xiaomi is really focusing on cost leadership. They're actually selling to Africa, they're selling to India, they're selling to all the developing world. And listening to the CEO of Xiaomi this morning, they are selling to Brazil, South America, and they're selling a phone that is basically 1/4 or less of the price of the Apple iPhone. That's a total different strategy than Apple's strategy of product differentiation. And that's a cost leadership strategy that Xiaomi is focusing on. So these are the two business strategies I want you to take away. But not only that, there is a third strategy, and that is called a focusing strategy. What do we mean by that? Well, this happens when a firm selects or emphasizes a market or customer segment with which to compete. So for example, Toshiba has focused on, or Olympus have focused on making a camera that's waterproof. Now, increasingly there's more cameras now that are waterproof, but they were first to actually introduce a waterproof camera. I think that was Olympus here. But we know there are a lot of cameras down here in the cheap 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000 Hong Kong dollar price range. And then we go up to the high-end full-frame models up to 55,000 more Hong Kong dollars, even more. You know, there's stuff I saw in a shop in London a few weeks ago that was over £10,000. Like, you can imagine, wow, 120,000 Hong Kong dollars, even more. Okay, so there's a lot of different segments here, and so a company may just focus on one little segment, and it's kind of like a product differentiation strategy, but it's at the same time it's a very much just focusing. It's focusing on one little segment. So keep these strategies in mind, but the most generic strategies are product differentiation and cost leadership. Okay, so I would like to ask you to list some cost leaders and product differentiators that you know of. Why do you use a particular service? So what this exercise is to help you to understand is how can you tell a product differentiation organization from a cost leader? the best way to tell is to ask the customer, why do they buy from that organization? Or, as I've written here, why do you use a particular service? Do they use that service or buy that product to save money? Or do they want a good quality service? Do they buy that product to save money, or is a particular function they're willing to pay for and they're willing to pay double or triple for, like with the iPhone, you see? All right. And so you may buy the iPhone because it has the operating system. You're prepared to pay more for the operating system. You may buy the iPhone because it syncs with your computer, it syncs with your tablet, it syncs with everything. Or you feel that the operating system is much superior to the Windows operating system or the Android operating system, for example. On the other hand, you might buy a cheap Android phone because, look, you just want a basic phone, so you make some phone calls, do some messaging, and just do the job that it's done. Okay, and you know that phones are going to change every 18 months, so you just want to save money. Okay, so, and that's one way of telling a product differentiation company from a cost leadership company. So we can think about commodities as a cost leadership business. Fast food, it's not because that's cheap, but how a firm competes. So people might buy fast food because of time, not because it's cheap. Okay, less regularly now I go into McDonald's because I know it takes longer to get served, because 3 or 4 years ago they changed their process to make it that they'll only make your burger on demand, whereas up until about 4 or 5 years ago they used to have inventory. So I didn't care so much if the hamburger was warm, not perfectly hot. I could get it straight away. It's kind of like buying it off the supermarket shelf, you see. So that they changed the service because they thought that, well, customers want something that's freshly made rather than on time. So they traded off one type of attribute of the product for another attribute of that service. You can see at the end of the day, whether a company is a cost leader or a product differentiator comes back to why the customer buys your product, why the customer buys your service. So keep that in mind. Okay, now let's have a look at a real example, and this is a real example taken from Credit Suisse, an analyst report of the smartphone industry, and we can see that this is several years ago. So Nokia was in there. They were a leader at the low end of smartphones, whereas Apple was at the high end, $500 plus. And we could say, well, which phone vendors follow a cost leadership or product differentiation strategy? Well, we can see that the phone vendors that have a majority of percentage of their sales in the low end would be seen as cost leaders, whereas the phone manufacturers at the high end would be seen as more product differentiators. Let's have a look at another example. We can have a look at the rankings, scorecard rankings for the top smartphone vendors. And we're going to use this to create a customer preference map. But for now, I want you to think about in a little bit more detail. And this is an analyst report based on the scorecard. We can see that Apple is a product differentiator in certain aspects. Apple knows, and analysts follow this, and they follow the markets, that the markets buy Apple because of their software. They buy Apple because of the brand. What about HTC? It's more because of partly the software, but equally because of the product portfolio, and relatively because of the chipset efficiency. What about Samsung? Very good on the brand, but also very good on the distribution and the supply chain, you see. So these rankings, what we're going to say now is that interesting analysts look at comparisons between these different industry players based on where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. And in that way, you can use that to characterize one company as being a stronger differentiator and another company being more strong on the cost leadership. You see what I'm getting at here? So it's not necessarily a black or white, but we can use these rankings to try and get a feel for what's a cost leader and what company is more focusing on a differentiation strategy. So I just want to show you that, yes, you can get data out there to demonstrate whether a company is a cost leader, whether a company is more of a product differentiator. And this is not just something in an academic's mind. The professor says, oh, there's cost leaders and there's product differentiators. There are real analysts out there in the investment banks that are creating these reports like what you see here, where you can get this information to decide for yourself, where are these different companies in the competitive landscape with respect to, are they more on the end of cost leadership or are they more on the end of product differentiation? So now we're going to use that information to understand what a customer preference map is. And in your textbook, this is chapter 12 of Horngren. This has been around for a long time. We're up to edition 15 now. Wow. So a cost leadership strategy for chipset. They introduced chipset, and I can tell you right now they're a company that really focuses more on cost leadership rather than product differentiation. But I'm going to show you how we can create a preference map that gives you a bit more insight as to why chipset is following a cost leadership strategy. Are you with me here? All right. So what I've introduced several slides ago is that there are two dominant strategies out there that companies follow. All right. So cost leadership, product differentiation. What we're doing in the last slide and this slide is to try and demonstrate to you, how do we verify if a company is following this strategy or company is following that strategy? You don't just ask the owner. Sometimes owners don't know. Often you have to check with the customer. Why do they buy from the customer? Why do they buy from you? Why do they purchase a service from you? And this is what the customer preference map is about. And you can survey customers to find out this information, or you can go to an analyst report like this one to try and gauge the different preferences that customers may have for one company versus another company. So let's have a look at what a customer preference map looks like. What we have on your left-hand side are different attributes of the product or service. Like chipset is providing a component that goes into a smartphone. So we've got price, scalability, customer service, quality, power and speed, customers, customized chip design. And so we might ask chipset's customers, so why do you buy from chipset? And so a 5 means that this is the dominant reason why they buy from chipset. They buy from chipset because it's cheaper. They buy from chipset because of scalability, because of customer service, but they don't buy from chipset because of the customized chip design, you see. In other words, chipset is very strong on price. It's relatively better than its competitors on scalability and customer service, but it is weak on customized chip design. However, chipset's biggest competitor, Visilog, is weaker on price and stronger on power and speed, or customized chips design. You see that? So a customer preference map helps us to graphically represent a particular company versus another company based on what customers perceive about what is the strength and weakness of these respective companies. And so you can see here that chipset has a cost leadership strategy. And this is my evidence for that strategy. That is, compared to Visilog, customers prefer chipset because of price and scalability and customer service. But they prefer Visilog because of the power and speed, and because of Visilog's customized chip design. In other words, Visilog is engaged more in product differentiation because they customize the chip to each customer's requirements. And so we can use that to understand how chipset might use that map to drive its strategy, to improve its operations, to improve its product delivery. So number one, understand the customer preference map. That's learning objective 1. And I've just shown you what a customer preference map is. Good. Number 2, under learning objective 1, we want to decide on a cost leadership strategy. Okay, because of this customer preference map, chipset is very good on price. It's very good on scalability. It's very good on customer service. So that's its strategy. It's decided to be cost leadership strategy. Maybe like Xiaomi, someone like that. So what does chipset have to do now that they've got that strategy? Well, now we go back to week 2, where we've got functional analysis, design analysis, process value analysis. We need to think about, can we use any of them to help support chipset's cost leadership strategy? Yes, we can. We can start to build internal capabilities to achieve cost leadership. For example, value engineering or process engineering. So we might think about making sure that we keep the design simple, making sure that we remove non-value added activities, or we do a cause and effect diagram and find out how we can do things better to minimize defects, do things better to sharpen our responsiveness to various customer requests. Remember, customer service is in chipset strategy. So now we're actually using strategy to drive what we need to do in the organization. See, top down, we find out what the customers are preferring, why they buy from you. Now that is starting to dictate about what you need to do better. So we're not starting bottom up and going out, we're starting outside and coming in. And so now we're using value engineering, process engineering to build internal capabilities to help manage the capabilities, which is learning objective 5. By the way, that's jumping ahead. But remember, we want to build internal capabilities, and then we've got value engineering, process engineering, and then that helps to go to strategic implementation of the balanced scorecard. What do we mean here? Well, that's in the next learning objective, where I teach you what we mean by the balanced scorecard. So the balanced scorecard is going to help us make this link between the strategy that chipset has decided on and what it needs to do in the internal process level and the learning and growth level. The balanced scorecard helps to make this linkage here. All right, so before we go to the balanced scorecard, let me repeat what we have learnt so far. We have decided that chipset has a cost leadership strategy, and we've looked at the customer process map to verify that. Now we're going to learning objective 3, that is, how do we actually design a system to make sure that we get a linkage between the strategy that chipset is following and what we need to do internally to execute on that strategy. And the balanced scorecard is a system that links strategy with execution. That's what we're doing here. And then learning objective 4 that we're going to look at later in the chapter, that is evaluating strategy measurement. All right, so far we've really looked at learning objective 1 and how we are deciding what is the strategy of chipset, and then verifying that with a customer preference map. It's sort of the starting point. Okay, And so later on with Learning Objective 3, in the next video, I'm going to show you how the balanced scorecard can help get that linkage between the strategy of chipset and its building of internal capabilities. Where should it build? What should it focus on? What should it not focus on, you see? And so the Learning Objective 3 is going to help make that linkage. Now, what we have got in the chapter 12 is this Learning Objective 2, which actually focuses on re-engineering. And it's kind of, I'm not sure if it fits in chapter 2, but it's there. So it's a chance for you just to understand what do we mean by re-engineering, and we have covered that. And let's just have a look at it briefly now, and that will finish today's video, and then we'll move on to the next video where we'll actually look at the balanced scorecard. So here we have what is re-engineering, and as I said earlier, re-engineering is all about changing the processes in the organization, changing the layout of desks in the organization, changing the roles and responsibilities of people. It's a radical change. It may be firing some management and making more people directly accountable to senior management. All right, so you're doing something radical, and this is long term. And so the examples here are changing roles and responsibilities, eliminate non-value-added activities and tasks, using information technology, developing employee skills. Now, these are long-term, and these are major things that we're trying to do with re-engineering. So understand what comprises re-engineering, redesigning business processes to improve performance by reducing cost and improving quality. So now we want to just relate this Learning Objective 2 back to chipset and its strategy implementation. So we have chipset, they've got their customer preference map, they've decided on cost leadership strategy, they're building internal capabilities. So this is kind of like value engineering, process engineering. But when we think about re-engineering in terms of a long-term change, the fundamental rethinking and redesign of business processes, it may be that we do the following, 1 or 2. That is, we may make sure that the engineering staff are skilled at making product and process improvements. Maybe we actually get them to go and develop new skills that they haven't had before. Maybe getting real-time data about manufacturing process parameters so we can intervene faster when there's a problem that is signaled by the new measurements that we put in. Maybe we need to train and empower workers on quality management, okay, extra training. What about order delivery process? Maybe we put in a whole new system. So for example, in Shanghai, Coles Myer have decided to put in a whole new system, an ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system, whereby they want to coordinate in a faster sequence their 30 suppliers with respect to the design and development of women's and babies' clothes. The design team are in Australia, and so part of this process requires the design team to get samples from the suppliers. They come back, and then there's interchanges of information and improvements to the final design before it goes into production. And they put in this enterprise resource planning system to enable faster communications and feedback. And so they want to cut the design to market time from 80 days down to 40 days. That is a radical change. And so that's a good example of a re-engineering of the process, especially in the extended enterprise between Coles Myer and its suppliers. So we could use that at chipset. Re-engineering, quality improvement is something that's happening all the time, whereas re-engineering is more radical. And so chipset can use re-engineering and basic process engineering to make changes to help implement their strategy. But that takes us to learning objective 3, which is strategy implementation with the balanced scorecard. So this is what we're going to cover in the next video. That is the balanced scorecard. So before I get to that, let's close this video now. Learning objective 1 was understanding how do we work out whether a company is following a cost leadership strategy or a product differentiation strategy. And number 2, okay, what is re-engineering? But having said that, I wanted to make you aware that re-engineering is kind of like a more long-term and a more radical process of basic value engineering. Okay, value engineering is something you might do from day to day, week to week, but re-engineering is a radical change that has long-term implications for how the organization operates. Okay, so there's learning objective 1, learning objective 2. See you in the next video where we look at learning objective 3. So thank you and catch you in the next video. Bye for now.